The first time my daughter-in-law made me take new medications, I realized I was starting to forget everything. And it's a mild stimulant, she said, tapping the glass of water she placed in front of me. You need to drink it all. I took the pills because I thought they were helping me, and my son insisted that I take them. By Thursday, I started losing things. On Friday, he brought a stack of brochures about nursing homes with smiling, gray-haired couples holding hands near a blooming garden. My son described them as something safe, good, and kind. He said the home was too complicated. He said I looked tired. It's on Saturday, I didn't take the pill. I put it in my mouth and then spat it down the sink drain. On Sunday morning, they came to me, happy and kind. My son laid out the papers on my kitchen table, a durable power of attorney, a temporary guardianship, a declaratory judgment of competency already signed by them. My daughter-in-law placed a glass of clean water next to my elbow and nudged a white pill toward me with her finger. "Mom," he said quietly, "this is just to help us help you." I looked at the sugar bowl, at the scratch on its rim from the year we dropped it while baking Snickers with my grandson. My hands weren't shaking. "Help," I repeated. "Is this what it takes?" His gaze slid to my wife. She nodded almost imperceptibly. For a moment, I saw our history, like a photo album flipped too quickly. My boy with skinned knees, my boy in a graduation tuxedo, my boy carrying his own son on his shoulders under the 4th of July fireworks. How could my own son do this to me? "Take your pill first," she said gently, as if it would help me. I lifted the glass, and in its curve, I saw them both, impatient, confident, sure I'd give in. I didn't drink. I put the glass down and smiled. "I'll sign," I said, and their relief radiated through the air like heat over asphalt. "Of course I will. But first, I want to read every line out loud, slowly. You know what I'm like." My voice was even. I'd been underestimated before. I pointedly narrowed my eyes after reading the first paragraph and let the silence stretch until my son's knee began to bounce under the table. Then, like a tired woman, I asked, "What exactly does this part mean?" And lowered my chin so my laryngophone would pick up every word. 2 weeks earlier, a neighbor's grandson had shown me how to put the tiny recorder under my collar with a strip of skin-colored tape. He'd laughed and called me a spy. I told him I was just a woman with a garden and that sometimes weeds learn to look like flowers. "Sign here, Mom," my son said, tapping the spot with a pen. I traced the line with my finger as if searching for a splinter. "You know," I said, "I'm misplacing so much lately. How would I even keep track of a pen?" I looked up, met my daughter-in-law's eyes, and held them. "You'll have to help me." She leaned in to place the pen in my hand the way she'd rehearsed it. "We've got you," she said. "We'll always have you." That was the moment I decided what kind of mother I would be this time. The kind who pretends to be led until the door locks behind the people doing the leading. The kind who keeps a key in her pocket anyway. "Before we sign anything," I said, "let's have breakfast." I stood, moved slowly in case anyone was filming, and set out 3 plates. I cracked eggs, I buttered toast, I talked about weather and church and the neighbor's new dog. I let the smell of coffee cover the small sound of my phone waking in the drawer. Then I asked, light as air, "What exactly do these medications do again?" Sometimes I feel like I'm watching myself from across the room. My daughter-in-law glanced at the outlet camera as if to confirm the performance. "It's normal," she said. "Your neurologist agreed it's best to stay the course." I didn't have a neurologist. I had a voicemail box with a 5-minute limit and a second phone number. Only 3 people knew. One of them was a retired pharmacist named Grace who had been making soup with me on Mondays since our husbands died a month apart. She had held the bottle up to the light and said, "These are not vitamins." I poured the coffee and asked the question I had practiced in the mirror, the one I promised myself I would ask if my voice could manage it. "Why are you in such a hurry to be in charge of me?" My son's mouth opened and closed. He started to say something about love. He started to say something about my safety. He reached for my hand. My daughter-in-law reached for the paperwork. The fern on the sill trembled when the heater clicked on, and in its dark dirt, the little white seeds gleamed. I could have screamed. Instead, I smiled at the people I loved most and began. Monday after breakfast, I carried the pill bottle to Grace. We sat at her round kitchen table, the one with the scorch mark shaped like a boot. She poured the tablets into a small white dish and frowned, turning one between her fingers. "These aren't what the label says," she murmured. "Look at the imprint. Whoever filled this swapped the generic, and not for the same thing." "Could a doctor have done that?" I asked. "A doctor could have prescribed something else. But then your bottle wouldn't lie about what it contains." She slid a tablet into a tiny envelope, labeled it with a number and the date, and did that for each pill we'd saved. "You said you've been putting them in your fern?" "I like the fern. It keeps secrets." Grace smiled without humor. So do people. I wanted to weep in her kitchen, to lay my head on the boot-shaped mark and cry for the boy I raised and the woman he loved and the ways a family can twist itself into a knot. But I didn't. I made a list. Grace helped me add a column for times and places. On Tuesday evening, I left my purse on my daughter-in-law's counter while we looked at the new pill organizer she'd bought me, the one with the cheerful sun and moon. I admired it too long. I told her I was lucky to have her. When she went to retrieve the printed dosage schedule from the office, I turned, palmed 2 tablets, and slid them into a second envelope under my sleeve. On Wednesday morning, I sat across from a man on a screen who introduced himself as Dr. Ellis and did not ask to see my identification. His background was a bookshelf with the spines turned inward. He never looked directly into the camera. My daughter-in-law stood just outside the frame, nodding whenever he described progression. "Do you know where you are?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Do you?" He chuckled, as men do when they think a woman is playful and not tired. "And what day is it?" "Wednesday," I said. "But I'm not sure that's the question you're trying to answer." After the call, I told my daughter-in-law I felt foggy. I let my hands fumble with the lid and watched her take the bottle from me with practiced tenderness. On Thursday afternoon, a notice was taped to my door. Emergency hearing, temporary capacity evaluation. The petitioner was my son. The hearing was scheduled for Monday morning. There was a line about possible appointment of a temporary guardian to prevent financial harm. I called Grace. "It's fast," I said. "They found a way to make it fast?" "Then we do too." Her voice was brisk. "Bring your notes. And your fern." Friday night, my quilting ladies gathered around my dining table and did not quilt. Janice brought a folder of printouts from the county website. Noreen showed me how to prop my phone so the screen wouldn't black out while recording. We practiced answers to questions none of us should ever have to answer. When I laughed, it sounded like a plate cracking in another room. I asked the question again, the one that wouldn't leave me alone. How could my own son do this to me? Grace put a hand over mine. "Sometimes it isn't your son," she said softly. "Sometimes it's the tide that carried him here." We added another line to the list, separate son from tide, if possible. Saturday morning, I went to the bank. The manager, a woman with a streak of white in her hair like a bolt of lightning, had known me since my husband and I opened our first checking account. She told me quietly that someone had called last week asking about wire transfer limits on my savings. "I can put a note on your account," she said, "requiring in-person verification for everything." "Please do." On Sunday, I watered my fern and locked my file cabinet and stood in my kitchen, waiting for Monday. The pills sat in their labeled envelopes like tiny letters I would finally get to read. I held my phone with the courtroom number pulled up, and I practiced what I would say when the judge asked, "Do you understand why you're here?" "Yes, Your Honor. I understand very well." The courthouse smelled like old paper and coffee. I wore my navy skirt and the pearl earrings my husband bought me on our 30th anniversary. My son sat at the petitioner's table in a suit he hadn't worn since the funeral. My daughter-in-law dabbed at her eyes with a tissue and touched his arm whenever I looked their way. The judge was a calm woman with a pen that clicked exactly twice before she spoke. "We're here on an emergency petition regarding Miss Hart," she said. "Allegations of cognitive impairment and risk of financial harm." She looked at me over her glasses. Ms. Hart, do you understand why you're here? I had practiced all night for that question. I stood, placed both hands on the table to steady them, and answered clearly. Yes, Your Honor. I'm here because I stopped taking pills my daughter-in-law provided and immediately stopped being forgetful. I'm here because I recorded a telehealth visit with a doctor who never verified my identity and described a progression he could not possibly measure. I'm here because my son was told I am declining, and he believed it, and because papers were placed on my kitchen table that would have transferred control of my accounts to him. My son made a small sound, like a hinge. The judge nodded. All right, we'll proceed step by step. Ms. Hart, do you have counsel? I have truth, I said, then heard Grace's voice in my head and added, and evidence. I handed the bailiff a neat stack of envelopes and a USB drive. The pills I did not take, labeled by date. A statement from a retired pharmacist identifying them as not matching the bottle's imprint code. Audio of the telehealth call. Copies of texts about the emergency petition before any doctor had evaluated me. My daughter-in-law dipped her head and a lock of hair slid forward like a curtain. The judge clicked her pen once. We'll listen to the audio. We'll take a brief recess for the clerk to log the medication evidence. And before we do, I want to hear from the petitioner. My son stood. He looked taller when he was 12 and lying about the broken window. I acted in good faith, he said hoarsely. We thought she seemed... The judge held up a hand. We will sort the good faith from the facts. Then she looked at me again. Ms. Hart, do you believe you're in immediate danger? I told the truth. I believe I'm in danger of being treated like a problem instead of a person. I believe someone has been tampering with my medication. I believe my son is scared and my daughter-in-law is not. The judge studied my face for a long moment. We'll reconvene in 20 minutes, she said. No one leave the building. As the courtroom emptied, my son skirted the aisle toward me, shoulders tight, mouth set. My daughter-in-law hung back, phone clutched white in her hand, eyes scanning the room as if a camera might be watching. She didn't realize the camera was the one she'd plugged into my outlet. Mom, my son whispered, we just wanted to help. Then help me now, I said. Start by telling me who arranged Dr. Ellis. He stared at the floor. The clinic is real, my daughter-in-law said quickly. People use telehealth all the time. Real and right are different words, I said, and watched her flinch at the softness in my voice. The second hook had sprung just as I planned, not the judge's question, but their decision to keep talking when silence would have been safer. They wanted to explain. People who do wrong always do. You only have to give them a little room. The middle act never needed to be long. It only needed to be sharp. After recess, the clerk confirmed the pill imprint codes didn't match the label. The judge listened to the telehealth recording, leaning back in her chair, face unreadable until the end, when she set the headphones down and said, that's a very efficient doctor. The clinic's number, read aloud by the bailiff, matched the one in my daughter-in-law's phone, pulled with her consent. After the judge reminded her she could decline and we could wait for a warrant, she didn't decline. She thought cooperation would drape her in innocence. Instead, it dressed her in motive. Text messages appeared on the courtroom monitor, black bubbles on a white field. Push the appointment, one read. Monday is best. We can file right after. Make sure she takes the morning dose, read another. My son's messages were scared and scattered. Are we sure about this? And I don't want to hurt her. And finally, fine. The judge did not look at him when she asked my daughter-in-law, did you administer medication to Ms. Hart that was not as labeled? It's over the counter, she said quickly. It just made her calmer. We needed a paper trail so the bank would take us seriously if she wandered into fraud. You don't know her like we do. She's stubborn. The room went very quiet. Stubborn is a word that walks into courtrooms with women like me and never walks out. Grace's statement was short and careful, all verbs and no adjectives. A lab result would take time, she wrote, but the mismatch was visible to the eye. She noted the medication's likely effects, confusion, memory gaps, drowsiness. She used the phrase pattern consistent with chemical restraint. The judge lifted a brow. That is a strong phrase. It's a true one, I said. Then came the twist I had not expected, the one that pulled the air from my lungs as neatly as taking off a bandage. A bank representative, invited by the judge to speak to the risk of financial harm, cleared her throat and said there were also inquiries last week about a wire transfer of $200,000 to a company called Silver Lane Wellness, with Ms. Hart listed as a guarantor. Silver Lane Wellness, I repeated, savoring each syllable as if it might poison me. What is that? My daughter-in-law stared straight ahead. My son closed his eyes. The judge made a note. Something about her pen sounded final. We'll continue this on the record. Ms. Hart, for now, I'm denying the emergency petition for guardianship. I'm issuing a temporary protective order preventing any changes to your accounts without your in-person consent. I'm also referring the matter of medication tampering and possible financial exploitation to the appropriate authorities. I could breathe again, but only to the top of my lungs. I had won a pause, not a war. My daughter-in-law's lawyer, summoned by text and breathless, asked for leniency. It's family. Emotions run high. The judge looked at me. Would you like to address that? I would, I said. Family isn't a reason. It's the reason not to. After, in the hallway, my son caught up to me. He was the same height as the boy who fell out of the oak tree and lay there grinning at the sky. Mom, please, he said, the word breaking. It's not what you think. What do I think? I asked. That she's some monster, he whispered. She's been under pressure. Her mother's medical bills, the debt from... He cut himself off and looked at the tiled floor. From Silver Lane? I asked. His shoulders sagged. It was supposed to be a business. Health coaching, we were going to... He gestured helplessly. It went wrong. We lost the lease, and then the lawyer said if we had decision-making over your finances, the bank would approve a bridge loan. I didn't want to take anything. I just wanted time. Time, I thought. The softest word and the hardest debt. Did you know about the pills? I asked. He hesitated 1 second too long. I didn't know the details, he said, which is not the same as I didn't know. I have stood beside you in storms, I said quietly. But I will not hold your umbrella while you drown me. He put his hand to his forehead like a penitent. What do I do? Tell the truth, I said. And then help me fix what you broke. Fixing it required less court and more backbone. The hearing bought me protection, the rest I took. First, I changed the locks. Then I changed the rhythm of my days. I stopped answering calls after 9. I kept my phone in a bowl by the door so I could see when it was gone. I told my quilting ladies, who are more effective than any security system when mobilized, they formed a schedule of check-ins that looked like casual tea. We pretended to discuss patterns while counting the cameras my daughter-in-law had helped me install. Front hall, kitchen, den. I left them in place and pointed them at the ceiling. Grace took the envelopes to a lab for formal confirmation. I took the outlet camera to the police station and asked to speak to someone who handled elder concerns. The officer who met me had a crease in his cheek where laughter lived. It didn't show that day. He watched the footage. My daughter-in-law palming a pill from a second bottle and dropping it into my tea, my son looking away, and his hand tightened on the mouse. You did the right thing, he said. We'll start a case. It may take time. I have some of that now, I said. At home, I made a pie. It felt defiant to butter the crust and listen to flour whisper against the bowl. I carried it next door to Grace because friendship deserves sugar when bitterness is everywhere else. On Wednesday, my daughter-in-law arrived with flowers and apologies, structured like if-thens. If I had been more open to help, then this wouldn't have spiraled. If I had admitted how overwhelmed I was, then none of this paperwork would have felt necessary. Her voice was gentle enough to pet a cat. I don't want to argue, I said. I want to understand. When did you decide I needed to be quieter? Her face flickered. No one decided that. You did, I said softly. You decided it would be easier if the woman who taught your son to tie his shoes also forgot how to read her bank statements. She started to cry. I let her. Tears were not a crime. The bottle she'd swapped was. 2 days later, a detective called to say the lab confirmed Grace's visual analysis. The pills were sedating antihistamines, chalk white and unmarked on the side the bottle's label didn't show. The bottle's imprint would have matched a memory aid that improves attention, not dulls it. The case would proceed. My son came by without his wife, hands jammed in his pockets, eyes rough with sleep. He sat at my kitchen table like a boy waiting for a report card. "I told the police what I knew," he said. "I told them I didn't check, and I should have." "And the loan?" I asked. "I withdrew the application." "Silver Lane is done." He rubbed his jaw. "We're selling the equipment to pay the penalties." "It won't cover everything." "I'll take the rest." "You'll take accountability," I said. "And you'll take space." He flinched. "You're cutting me off." "I'm stepping aside so you can feel the edges of what you did," I said. "Sometimes love is a door that shuts so you can learn how to knock." He stood, walked to the fern, and looked at it for a strange, long time. "I remember when we bought this," he said. "You said it was stubborn." "It's resilient," I corrected. "There's a difference." He nodded once and left. The detective called again to ask if I would testify if charges were filed. I said yes. The judge's office called to formalize the protective order, and the clerk said she liked my earrings. Grace sat across from me and cut another pie, and we talked about anything else for an hour. Then we talked about what comes next. What came next, unexpectedly, was the bridal shower invitation for my granddaughter. It had been planned months ago. My daughter-in-law's name was on the bottom as a host. I sat with the card in my hand and could not decide if attending was strength or self-harm. I went, not to make a scene, to watch my granddaughter, who is as bright as morning, unwrap a small world of linens and monogrammed cutting boards, and to remember that all this was happening inside a family and not a theater. My daughter-in-law avoided me until cake. Then she came, set a plate in front of me, and said without preface, "I'm going to plead to the misdemeanor they offered." I set the fork down. "What did they offer you?" "Interference with medical treatment," she said. "If I finish an elder care course and do community service, it stays off my record." "And the wire transfer?" I asked. She looked at the ceiling the way people look when they are choosing which piece of their soul to hand you. "Fraud didn't stick?" "There wasn't a transfer yet." "Only intent, I said, tasting the syllables. "Intent is where the weeds start." She didn't argue. She touched the back of an empty chair, not sitting. "I'm sorry," she said, and for a moment the sorry sounded true enough to build on. Then she added, "I wish you had just trusted me." And the foundation cracked. "I wish you had been trustworthy, I said and picked up my fork. I would have left it there, a clean cut, if not for the knock at my door a week later and the small voice on the other side. "Grandma, can I come in?" My grandson stood on the steps, face too solemn for 15. He held a plastic bag with a pill bottle inside, label peeled halfway off. "I found this in Mom's car," he said. "There are 2 kinds of pills in here. I thought you'd want to know. It is a strange thing to receive evidence from a child and to understand that he knows what it is." I took the bag and the boy and closed the door. "You did the brave thing," I said. "We'll do the right thing with it." We called the detective together. We logged the time and the place. We wrote down the conversation because paper remembers even when we don't. My son arrived an hour later, out of breath, eyes blown wide. "He took the car," he said. "He brought me something," I said. I didn't show him the bag. "He brought you a chance." He sat on the bottom step and put his head in his hands. The detective called back the next day. The second bottle matched the clinic that had scheduled the telehealth appointment. The mix of pills inside suggested sloppiness more than malice. 2 different labels peeled and reapplied. The prosecutor's office added a count of tampering with physical evidence. It wasn't the kind of justice that sings on television. It was the kind that inches forward with small feet. I didn't watch the plea. I sat in my kitchen and replanted my fern, shaking loose the clotted soil and saving what still looked alive. My hands turned black. It felt good to make a mess I could sweep up myself. The call came in the afternoon. The prosecutor's voice was clipped but not unkind. Community service 24 weeks, a ban on acting as health proxy for anyone but her husband without a court's permission, a restitution payment to me for the lab costs and the locks, a letter of apology addressed to me, and one addressed to the court. And your son? I asked. He wasn't charged, she said, but the judge said some things he'll hear for a long time. Sometimes the law doesn't heal what it records. Sometimes it simply writes down the scar. I made tea. I took my phone out of the drawer and deleted the set of recordings labeled kitchen. I kept the one of my voice answering the judge, not because I needed a trophy, but because I liked the way I sounded when I remembered who I was. My son came by that evening. He stood in the doorway with his hands visible, like a man walking into a room with a gentle dog. "Mom," he said, and waited for permission. "Come in." He sat at the table and told me he'd started seeing someone at the community clinic about why he does the things he does when he's scared. He told me he'd put his name on the restitution check too, even though he wasn't required. He said he'd attend the elder care course with his wife, not because he had to, but because he should have known better. "Do you want me at the graduation?" he asked, and then laughed at himself. "That's not what it's called." "It is now," I said. "We made rules the way you make a quilt. Piece by piece, matching edges. He would not come in without calling. He would not ask about my bank account. He would not bring his wife for a while. I would call him if I needed a light bulb changed or a ladder steadied, which felt like giving him a job where he could be useful without handling the wiring of my life." As he left, he paused by the fern again. "It looks good," he said. "It is good," I replied, "because I keep checking what's in the soil." After the door closed, I sat and let the house be quiet around me. The camera's empty eyes stared at the ceiling. The fern breathed its slow, green breath. The sugar bowl was still nicked, and the nick made it mine. And people will tell you that revenge is loud. I don't think that's true. Sometimes revenge is quiet and measured, a series of small choices that add up to a woman refusing to be erased. Justice, when it arrives, doesn't always bring trumpets. Sometimes it brings a clipboard, a community service schedule, and a judge who writes in her neat hand, "You may no longer stand between this woman and her own life." I slept that night for the first time in weeks, not because no one could hurt me, but because I had remembered how to protect myself. In the morning, I made coffee and set a pill on the table. Vitamin D, the kind the label promised. I swallowed it with water that tasted like ordinary mercy. Then I dialed my sister and told her I wanted to visit the beach before summer ended. She said she'd bring sandwiches. I said bring stubborn ones. "Resilient," she corrected. "Right," I said, smiling at the fern. "Resilient." When my son called later, we talked about nothing important. Tomatoes, the neighbor's dog, the freezer that made a noise like a tiny train. Before he hung up, he said, "Thank you for not giving up on me." "I didn't," I said. "I just stopped letting you hold the map." After we said goodbye, I wrote a list for myself and put it under the magnet shaped like a chicken on the fridge. Check the soil, read the labels, record the truth, ask the hard question, water what stays. And if anyone ever sets a glass of water by my hand and smiles like kindness, I will drink if I choose, not because someone put it there. I know where my throat is. I know where my voice lives. The judge's question still echoes sometimes when I'm washing dishes and the late sun is turning the room the color of butter. "Do you understand why you're here?" Yes. I'm here because I stopped playing along with a story that erased me. I'm here because I chose my own ending. It feels like waking up not from sleep, but from permission. It feels like a woman who looks at her life, sees the knots, and takes them apart with patient fingers. It feels like justice, which isn't a spotlight or a speech, but a kitchen table with no papers on it, and a son who knocks before he enters, and a grandmother who keeps her keys in her pocket and her eyes open, and a fern growing exactly where it's been all along.
My grandma told me this story. I have many more stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the most interesting things.